This podcast is brought to you by the IIEA, sharing ideas, shaping policy.
All right, excellent. Good afternoon, everybody, and it's an absolute pleasure to welcome here to the IIEA. My name is Dr. Matt O'Neill, and I'll be chairing today's session. I'm present, the climate project lead here at the IIEA, and I'm pleased to say today we have Dr. Julie Norman in conversation talking about her new book, Gaza, The Dream and the Nightmare. It's also been co-authored with Carter Hallward, and I think this work offers a vital contribution to understanding Gaza by centering the voices of ordinary people. And if you have a chance to look through the book, it's very interesting. It has interviews from students, aid workers, journalists, and teachers. And it weaves a very sensitive and very compelling and good guide if you're new to the topic of historical context, and offers real human-centered approach to illuminate complex realities that are behind the headlines that we've been often seeing. So just before we begin, I'm going to read Dr. Norman's bio, but just a couple of housekeeping notes. She'll present for about 20 minutes with some extracts of her book and some background from the context, and then we'll move into Q&A. I'll go to people in the room first, and then we'll go to online after that and go back and forth. And if you're joining us online, I'd ask you to please use the Q&A function to submit your questions, and somebody will make sure to write the questions out and send them to me. Whether you're in the room or online, when submitting questions, please state your name and affiliation. That's always very important. And again, remember that both the presentation and the Q&A are very much on the record when you're thinking about your question. So Dr. Norman is Associate Professor in Politics and International Relations at University College London. She is also the Director of UCL's Israel-Palestine Initiative and an Associate Fellow on the Middle East at Chatham House. She's the author, of course, of the book we're going to be talking about today, Gaza, The Dream and the Nightmare, as well as Sounding Conflict from Resistance to Recognition, the Palestinian Prisoner Movement, Resistance and Disobedience, Understanding Nonviolence and Nonviolent Resistance in the Second Intifada, to name a few of her many publications. And again, we're very deeply pleased to have you here with such an expert of your caliber. Outside of that, she is also a very well-known commentator on the Palestinian, Israel, and international conflict, and she's very much frequent commentator on the BBC, Al Jazeera, CNN, and MSNBC as well. So without further ado, Julie, I will let you go ahead with your opening comments.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you to IIEA for hosting me today. Thank you so much to Matt, who we used to work together in Belfast when I was based at Queen. So it's wonderful always to come back and be reunited with someone who was just such an excellent colleague and friend during those years. And I'd also like to thank Stephen, who's here from Hodges Figgis selling the book. If you are interested in the book, we are donating proceeds from the book to humanitarian aid in Gaza. We're not trying to make money off this book. And just a spoiler alert, it's not an academic book. So like, sorry, not sorry. For people looking for that, this is very much a book for general readers. As Matt said, what I thought I would do is just use the first few minutes to give a story behind how the book came about, some of the challenges and tensions that came up while we were writing it. And then I'll read some quotes and passages from the book, and then we'll open it up to questions. So one thing a lot of people ask me is like, why did you, whoopsie, and the flowers, nothing symbolic about that. Okay, well, I'll just leave those. Okay. So people ask me kind of how this book came about and when we started writing it. October 7th, as many of you may remember, happened on a Saturday. And I think it was that Monday, I got an email from an editor who I had worked with before, who said, we've been needing a book on Gaza for a while, kind of a basic history, how did Gaza get to this point kind of book. We're definitely going to need one now. Are you interested? And as Matt said, I've worked on Palestine and Israel-Palestine for about 2 decades now, but mostly in the West Bank. I'm not usually based in Gaza. I mean, no one can get in right now, but even prior, I was usually in the West Bank. But I did a quick just Google search to see like, well, what books are out there on Gaza? And in fact, there weren't that many just kind of introductory texts for basic readers to understand Gaza. I think there will be a lot more now, but there weren't then. And the second thing I had to ask myself is, do we need a separate book on Gaza? Isn't Gaza just inherent in the Palestine story? But I think as our book and others show, over the last 2 decades, Gaza's trajectory has been quite unique and distinct within the broader Israel-Palestine conflict. And then just watching things unfold, even as they were in those first 48 hours after October 7th, those 3 things I said, yeah, I'm interested in this. I do think this book needs to happen, and I would like to be part of it. So I got back to the editor pretty quickly, and she said, great, how fast can you write it? And I was like, oh, okay. And so I called my former co-author, Maia Hallward. I said, are you interested in co-writing this? She said, yes. And we really started working on it almost immediately. We got a proposal together and started writing by December 23, January 24. We wrote very intensely through 2024. And the manuscript went in at the end of 2024. We were able to make some revisions up through about this time last year, but I would just emphasize that the book, it's telling a story that is still unfinished, and the book itself had to cut off at a certain point. So it doesn't include the events of last summer, the 20-point plan, the ceasefire, et cetera, that's come since then. But that is how the book came about. And as we started writing, though, there were, I can say, 3 kind of tensions that kind of emerged that really defined the shape of the book. Again, when we were first asked to write it, it was this sense of kind of an introductory history to Gaza, how Gaza got to this point, with the idea that October 7th, the Gaza war as it was unfolding, would probably be like a chapter at the end. Again, perhaps naively, I think others could foresee things maybe more than we do. There was a sense then that that things would wind down maybe by Christmas or by Ramadan or by Easter. This idea that the war would keep going on and on was something that we had to adapt to. And so I would say we were writing the book while focusing on the history on the one hand, trying to go through archives, look at texts that we could find from the Mandate period, from the 30s, the 40s, and kind of this year-by-year trajectory. At the same time as the war, what many international organizations then and continuously have started identifying as a genocide was also unfolding in real time. And so I often kind of describe this as if you've read a historical fiction novel or something where you have 2 characters in different time periods and kind of 2 narratives going back and forth. And at some point in the book, those 2 timelines are going to meet, but you're not sure where. That's kind of the way we felt with writing this. I was going through this history, but also essentially keeping a Google Doc where every day I was writing down what was happening in real time in Gaza with hyperlinks, with links to news articles or what have you. And we were just going to have to tie them in together at some point. And obviously this was not fiction, this was very real, but that was part of the process behind writing this book. And the shape of it changed such that I would say the last third or a quarter now is October 7th and everything that came after, whereas the first 2/3 or so are still the history. And I maintain that I think it's really hard to understand what's been happening recently in Gaza without that historical background, but likewise, I think a book that dealt with that history and then just left the last 2 years as a sort of coda would have been quite obviously incomplete. So one thing the book, I think, tries to do is kind of marry that history with the contemporary, and I hope people feel we did that well. So that was one thing. The second thing that emerged for us pretty quickly is, I said, if we're going to write this book, I want it to be a book that I would want to read, or like my mom would want to read, or my friends would want to read. I don't want it to just be a long Wikipedia kind of entry of like, and then this happened, and then this happened. And most of my research in the region and elsewhere has always relied a lot on the ground field work, on interviews, on direct narratives from everyday people about what is happening in different conflict contexts. So we said this to the publisher too. We said, if we're going to do this book, we want to make sure that Gazan voices are very much part of the narrative and not just sprinkled on top as emotional salsa, as one of my friends says, but actually like anchoring the narrative in lived experiences of real people. So I would just say too, we were aware too as 2 non-Palestinian women writing this book. There's identity and ethics kind of issues just with that too. Many people would not write the book for that reason. We still chose to write the book, but very much wanted to ensure that Gazan voices were front and center. So we did dozens of interviews over the course of the research. Most were people who had managed to evacuate in the first 6 months after October 7th, when the Rafah border was still open, or people who were already living outside in the Gulf or in Europe or other places. These interviews ranged from, one conversation to multiple conversations over hours. A lot took place over Zoom. And I would say they were very intense and emotional conversations. But we do try and bring those voices into the book. And if you do pick it up, and I'll read some of these passages too, for me, this is what made the book came alive and honestly made it worth writing, was having people's personal accounts. And again, this wasn't academic, this isn't a random sample, but it is a cross sample of Gazans, old, young, from north, south, from refugee communities, from non-refugee communities, and a lot of people who are probably not similar to some people in this room, people who worked in humanitarian organizations, journalists, teachers, students, et cetera. If people are interested in that aspect too, I'll just say I ended up writing a play also based on just those narratives. And so we're starting to do that play now in London that kind of interweaves quotes from those interviews into performance piece. So if there's any arts related people interested in that piece, that's another way we're trying to get these voices out there. So anyway, so we kind of had the history, the contemporary, and then trying to kind of marry these personal stories with what's a general scholarly narrative, but one that I hope is very accessible to people. And the third kind of duality, I guess, that I just wanted to speak to is, almost every person who we spoke with or who we approached to interview, almost everyone said to us, if you're going to do this, yes, talk about the wars, talk about occupation, talk about, suffering and these things, but also make sure that you tell, kind of the positive aspects of Gaza too, what Gaza was actually like and what it was actually like to live here. Talk about the fact that there were vibrant universities, that there were arts clubs, that there were cinemas, that there was entrepreneurship, that people worked as architects and engineers, that people were creating and doing things constantly. People said talk about the social fabric, the idea that if you took a service, like a shared taxi, and someone had come from the market and had fresh fruit, everyone in the taxi would sample, get a sample of the fruit, be given a strawberry or what have you. They said make sure that people know that we weren't just a passive people living in squalor. We were a very vibrant society here, and we want that captured also. And that is in fact where the subtitle to the book comes from, The Dream and the Nightmare. One of our interviewees just totally unprompted said, look, living in Gaza was like a dream and a nightmare at the same time. And many people ended up kind of using similar analogies to talk about this kind of duality of life in Gaza. So we try and capture that in the book also. So what I thought I might do is just read a couple, some of these quotes to kind of give some sense of what I mean with some of these lived histories. And I would say, first, when starting a book like this, when you're going to start it, what point in history is a big question, and there's a choice there. We chose to start the book essentially at the start of the British Mandate in the post-World War I kind of time period, in that interwar time. One thing that I found interesting when writing, we kind of start with this question of how did Gaza become the Strip? And Gaza as a territory as we know it is a pretty new territory. Gaza City itself, on the other hand, goes back thousands of years. You can see it referenced in biblical texts and ancient texts as kind of an urban hub and a crossroads for centuries. But Gaza as kind of a region was one that initially kind of becomes a district under the British in kind of a slightly different shape than it is now. And then its borders become more condensed after the Nakba and the 1948 war. I'm going to start with a quote from a Nakba descendant. So the Nakba, 1948, the War of Independence for Israel, known as the catastrophe for Palestinians, when over 700,000 people were displaced from their homes. One reason we start with here, the Nakba affected pretty much all Palestinians, but for Gaza in particular, Gaza's population tripled during this time, from about 70 to 80,000 people to over 250,000 people. So over 200,000 refugees kind of fled to Gaza. It was kind of the first Palestinian urban hub that people reached if they were fleeing south during that war. And that's one reason why, even before 2023, over 70% of Gaza's population was either direct Nakba survivors or their descendants. And that's one reason why Gaza has a kind of distinct history. So we spoke with a number of people who had this history, and that's the majority of Gazans. And I'll start with my friend Ali, who I actually know from London now. But his parents were displaced during the Nakba, and he recalls being his dad taking them back to see their house, which was just over the new border. So he said, I remember going to see our house in Al-Majdal when I was 4 years old. My father took me and my brother. A Jewish Yemeni family was living there, and the wife let us see the land and the outside, but wouldn't let us come inside. She also said if her husband came home and saw us, we'd be in big trouble. But I remember our father wanted us to see it and say, this is your house. That was your furniture. So Ali goes on, and his village, again, was one that would have been included in the Gaza district under the British, but then ended up outside under the new borders. I won't read all the quotes, but just to say, we hear from Ali again, going into the 1970s and 1980s after Gaza becomes occupied by Israel. And at this point, the borders are still somewhat open. So Ali and people like him were able to still go into Israel to work. But he talks about feeling like working like a slave. He said, we were, of course, we were paid laborers. He said, but we were working on our own land. And he was actually working on a flower farm in Al-Majdal, in the village where his family was from and where their land would have been. And he was there working for a company. So we walk up through the 70s and 80s. Many of you who are Palestine and Middle East kind of people know the late 80s is when the first Intifada begins. Intifada for most Palestinians roughly translates to uprising. I know that word means a lot of different things in different contexts now, but for most Palestinians, it just means uprising. So a lot of the slightly older people that we interviewed had very keen memories of this time. And this is a quote from Ibrahim. And he says, my generation, my classmates and friends, we were the targets of the crackdowns, of the child arrests. I lost many friends and classmates during this time. It was a real turning point. It's when I first started to really see the occupation. I was sentenced to 16 months in prison because I was writing graffiti on the walls. 16 months, even though I was just 16 years old. At the same time, Ali goes on to say, and this is kind of the dream and the nightmare, kind of the positive spin to it too. He says at the same time, the Intifada revealed a beautiful side of life in Gaza, the solidarity in the community and the neighborhood. There was a sense that no one would go to bed hungry, that everything would be shared. Food, water, soap, mattresses, everything. The entire neighborhood was like a family. From the late 80s, we go up through the 90s, the Oslo period. We talk about the second Intifada. I'm just seeing how I'm doing on time. Can I? Okay. I'll read a quote from Zaina, who was a young teenage girl during the second Intifada, going into the 2000s. And she says, I remember when the second Intifada started. I was quite young, and I remember feeling happy at the time at first, because there was a strike and the schools were closed. It was all fun and games for a while, but not for long. The soldiers, the clashes, the jeeps, the constant beeps of the soldiers' walkie-talkies, these are the images of my childhood. I remember the burning tires and the youth throwing stones. Sometimes they would come into our school and would tell us to get out, that soldiers were coming in. I remember the funeral processions, the martyrs, who were sometimes the brothers of my friends at school. I remember the first encounter I had with a tank. It was coming out of a side alley, and I was crossing the main road. I just looked down the side street, and there was this huge tank. It was scary then, but then you kind of adapt. It became kind of the norm of my childhood. So we talk about the second Intifada. We talk about Israel's disengagement or withdrawal from Gaza after the second Intifada in 2005. This is when Israel withdraws soldiers, military, as well as settlements from Gaza, but maintains control over Gaza's borders. So this remained a dispute within Israel, and I would say somewhat internationally, if this still counted as occupation or not. For the international community, it did. For many in Israel, it did not. So we talk about that decision, the politics behind it. We talk about the election of Hamas. why they were elected, how Hamas operated attempted to operate, I would say, simultaneously as an armed resistance movement and as a government, and tried to kind of bridge that duality, I would say, increasingly unsuccessfully. We talk about the series of Gaza wars that predated October 7th. And I do have a chapter just on October 7th as well. And as part of my field work, I did visit some of the Israeli communities and kibbutzim that were attacked on October 7th, visited the hostage and missing square. And so we do have a chapter also detailing those testimonies as well, which I think was a choice that we wanted to make. I think others, would make a different choice, but we felt that was really important to have that chapter. And as I said, the last part of the book really engages what happened in Gaza following October 7th. So I'll just share a couple quotes from there if we still have time. So I'll go back to Ibrahim. He was the guy who was a young guy during the Intifada who was arrested for putting graffiti on for Palestine graffiti. So he was living in Jabalia camp, which is at the north of the Gaza Strip, and Jabalia in that northern area was one of the first to be ordered to kind of leave in those first days after October 7th and to flee south. So he says, "I was living in the north of Gaza. They told people to move to the south of Gaza at the time. There was a discussion in my family between me and my siblings. Should we leave or should we stay? I said we should leave, that this time was not going to be like the other times. I was with my wife and my 2 kids, so I said, okay, let's move to the south. And I left to the south with more than 45 people, brothers, sisters, kids, nieces, nephews. It was a big challenge. Where to move? How to move? Are you going to stay together? What is the right strategy? Should you stay together so the whole family is destroyed in one hit? Or should you travel in clusters so if one place is hit, the others manage to stay alive? And then your brain is overflowing with information and news that family is killed, that neighborhood is gone, that clinic, that building. You are leaving your home to nowhere. You sleep in a street, a car, a classroom, a house, a tent, a hospital. You have nowhere, literally nowhere to go." Ibrahim's experience was very similar to almost everyone we spoke with who was still in Gaza at this time, and almost everyone talked about that choice of like, do you keep the family together or do you split up in case there's a strike? And Ibrahim went on to tell us, "From my family and my wife's family, we lost more than 100 people. And the thing is that all of them are what Israel calls collateral damage. No one had links to Hamas. But they didn't care. They targeted buildings with these 2-ton bombs. So yes, they collapsed the targeted house, but also at least 5 other houses nearby. That's what happened to my family and my wife's family. It's the same thing that happened to everyone." There's many more I could read from this time period. I'll just read, I'll read one more from Ibrahim. After the family gets moved multiple times, most families moved at least 8, 9, 10 times. They were in central Gaza by this point, and he became involved in trying to set up community kitchens to help distribute food when that was available. So he says, "When you speak about the community kitchen, you need a big pot to cook in, and you need to put it up high. And you need to be a good garbage collector to collect papers and bags to build a fire underneath it. Then you need to buy ingredients like lentils or rice or whatever is available. Then you get families nearby to help in preparing the food." So we were establishing these things, and everyone was a volunteer, the people cooking, the people distributing. So the level of solidarity was very high. I was doing these things, and I was happy that I could help people. I feel proud of my people. Some people need a leader, but others are inspired by the need of others and the social solidarity. During a crisis, you can hear this sense of we, of us. Look, that's human nature. We can't say we Gazans are a society of angels. You have bad people and good people. But in a crisis, we adopt this perspective, and you can see these stories of solidarity and sharing. It's not just sharing pain, because pain was for everyone, but also sharing food and supplies. And I'll end with just one last quote that I think is similar on this. This is from Allah, who is a young woman who we spoke with. And she said, "People in Gaza, they like to live life. They know the value of it. The people of Gaza are missing many basic things like food, electricity, a good life, and we value these things very much. People know exactly the meaning of having a hot meal to eat, the meaning of having your family. I find that people are just trying to continue life with what they have. Regardless of the situation, what is happening, they're trying to pass their tragedies and sorrows, and they're just trying to live." So I'll stop there.
This podcast is brought to you by the IIEA, sharing ideas, shaping policy.